Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting to order, but I would like to begin by acknowledging that the municipality of Jasper is on Treaty 6 and 8 territories, as well as the Jasper House Métis District. This land is the traditional territory, meeting ground, gathering place, traveling route, and home for the Dinéza, Assiniboine-Winnewac, Assiniboine-Nehoa, Nehewak, Anishinaabe, Secwepemc, Stony Nakota, Mountain Métis, and Métis. The municipality of Jasper acknowledges the land to honor the relationship Indigenous people have with this land, to remind us of our responsibility and obligations to this place and to Indigenous people, and to affirm our accountability to address the ongoing impacts of colonization that continue to affect Indigenous peoples. I'd also like to recognize that the month of June, on top of being Pride Month and Indigenous History Month, is also Men's Mental Health Month, and I wanted to acknowledge the diligent work of the people working toward the Men's Shed, which will be a great contributor to the health and mental health of men in our community. I'll move on then to additions to the agenda. Councillors, are there any additions today? Seeing none, is there a councillor willing to move that we approve the agenda of the June 11th committee meeting? Councillor Hall, all in favor? Motion carries unanimously. We move then to review, is wondering if there's any business arising from the May 28th committee of the whole meeting that were approved June 4th. Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I just wanted to acknowledge it's in the minutes here, just to acknowledge once again the addition of the stop signs at Collin and Pyramid Lake Road. And also we had some mention of the Food Alliance at that meeting and appointing a member. And since this meeting and our last regular meeting, we had the announcement by the Jasper Food Bank regarding the closure of the food bank for the summer, and was wondering if any other councillors were aware or administration of that occurring prior to the announcement.
I, as the appointed representative of the Food Alliance, which is not a not-for-profit society, but rather a consortium of people interested in food security, will be attending that meeting this evening. And I can bring back a report to council from there.
Thank you for that.
My pleasure. We move on then to delegations, and this is the delegation portion of our agenda, where any member of the community can come forward to address council on any topic that is on the agenda. Is there anyone here who would like to make a presentation? Please, Mrs. Pollard, please feel free to come to them.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Carrie Pollard. My family moved to Jasper over 17 years ago, and I felt compelled to attend today's meeting to ask some questions regarding the possible purchase of electric buses. My husband could not be in attendance today, and thus I would like to ask some questions on his behalf as well. He has been a heavy-duty technician by trade for 34 years, with 6 years of specialization as a mobile bus mechanic with CVIP certification. Please refer to agenda item 7.1, request for decision. In the conclusion on page 10, it reads, well, there will continue to be portions of the community opposed to transit, generally and electrification specifically, the proposed switch to an ownership model and BEVs is the most sound financial decision for taxpayers and also demonstrates that Jasper is a forward-thinking community that values the natural environment. I would like to make it clear that I am not opposed to transit nor electrification. In fact, as a global citizen, a parent, and a teacher, I see great value in both. As a taxpayer, I am seeking reassurance that the proposed shift to BEVs truly is the most sound financial decision for taxpayers. It is undeniable that battery electric buses greatly reduce emissions and thus benefit our planet. In the short term, though, the transition can be extremely challenging, as has been proven in places such as Edmonton, St. Albert, and Prince Edward Island. Issues such as mechanical problems, parts availability, weather dependency, and range limitations have been highly publicized. My first question is regarding the expected lifespan of electric buses. According to the St. Albert Gazette, St. Albert was the first municipality in Canada to incorporate long-range electric buses. The initial expected lifespan of 18 years was reduced to 12 years due to premature battery degradation, mechanical failures, and charger malfunctions. So my question is, has the committee projected an expected lifespan for the proposed fleet? One must consider what has arisen in places like Edmonton. The city of Edmonton has 60 electric buses, but due to hardware issues, more than half are regularly out of service at any given time. According to CTV News, the city approved funding for 20 new buses in December of 2023, and all of those buses that they're ordering are diesel. In St. Albert, 3 of 7 buses needed complete battery replacements within the first 5 years, and each bus was out of service for 80 days for the duration of the replacement. According to a CBC report, electric school buses in Prince Edward Island have been plagued with problems, including issues with heating systems and air compressors freezing, which can interfere with braking. Please refer to Agenda Item 7.2, Request for Council Decision on page 12. Key components of the application for the grant were the purchase of up to 3 zero-emission transit buses, ZEBs, as well as the construction of a transit facility to house the ZEB. I'm just asking the question, is it possible to purchase 2 ZEBs and perhaps 1 hybrid or diesel bus as a safety net? Please refer to Agenda Item 7.1, page 8. It says there are currently no federal transit grants available to support purchasing traditional internal combustion engine fleet. So I ask the question, are there any grants available that would possibly support purchasing hybrid buses? As a taxpayer, my primary concern at this point in the process is contingency. Experience in other communities have proven beyond a doubt that when introducing new technology, challenges are inevitable, and specialized training and expertise will be critical to navigate the related complexities. Thus, my final and most important question is this. If the decision is made to move forward with the purchase of battery electric buses, will a contingency plan be devised to deal with any and all issues that will inevitably arise? What will that contingency plan entail? In order to make a successful transition, it is critical that potential problems are addressed proactively and strategically. Thank you very much for the opportunity to pose these questions today. I look forward to this morning's discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carrie. Will we answer those questions in the process, or would you like an opportunity now, CAO given, to address those specific questions?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, I think probably most useful to go into the report. Some of those questions will be answered. There's additional ones that aren't specifically answered that I'd be happy to speak to. And I imagine council will have additional questions as well. And so maybe it makes the most sense to transition from there into the report, and we can cover all that ground at the same time.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm there was no one else in the audience who wanted to speak. Okay, thank you. Then we move on to 6 correspondence. Do we have any correspondence to discuss today? Then we move on to 7.1, electric bus procurement. And Should I turn it over to you, Theo, given to open?
Yes, thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer. So administration is here today with a recommendation that committee recommend council authorize administration issue a request for proposals for the supply of 3 battery electric buses and associated charging infrastructure. Of course, we also, in the staff report, have an alternative for council, and that would be that committee recommend council approve discontinuing work on the electric buses and direct administration inform the federal grant funder of that choice. And obviously that alternative would impact the second report that's on our agenda today. So in terms of background, the 2011 Community Sustainability Plan, 2018 Transportation Master Plan, and the 2021 Economic Recovery Task Force all include recommendations to exploring the opportunity for future internal and regional transit connections for Jasper. In the summer of 2021, Council of the Day supported a pilot project that saw small daily averages that increased over the period of the project from July to September. Then in 2022, Council saw the results, sorry, in 2023, Council saw the results of the 2022 study that was developed using interviews of local stakeholders, surveys of residents and visitors, and research on industry best practices. That study led to the Transportation Strategy and Action Plan, which was presented to Council in early 2023. At that time, Council directed administration to begin the next steps to establish a fixed route bus service beginning in 2023, and that service started up in September of last year. Since the service started in September, it's provided just over 32,000, or I guess just under 33,000 trips, which is actually ahead of the 30,000 trips that were predicted in the strategy and action plan. The strategy and action plan also recommended that the municipality start with a turnkey solution where all operations were done through a third party, including the provision of drivers, fleet, storage for the fleet. And the recommendation was specific that the municipality should do that in order to start quickly while pursuing grants so the municipality could purchase its own fleet and construct its own facility. Administration did pursue grants and we were successful. And that brings us really to the recommendations that are contained in the report today on how we utilize that federal grant. I think council is well aware there's $5 million towards just over $6 million of projects. So council, I'll run through the essential components of the report here. I'm happy to take questions at any time if anybody wants to catch me with, in between breaths. Or if you want at the end, but certainly if anybody wants to break in and ask a question, by all means do. So the first question is really around this concept or the discussion of owning versus renting. Owning, of course, offers greater control over the assets, long-term cost savings, and the ability to directly benefit from grants and incentives that aren't available to the private sector. Renting, on the other hand, does have some benefits, obviously lower upfront costs, which make it a more flexible short-term solution. And indeed, that's why the strategy and action plan recommended that approach to starting up using a rental approach and then transitioning to owning over a longer term. So under our current contract, which is that turnkey solution where the contractor provides buses, storage, regular maintenance, major repairs, and the drivers themselves, this year we will pay just over $500,000, $570,000 in contracted costs. That amount is set to increase by $10,000 a year over the next 2 years. And if we assumed a standard inflationary increase between 2026 and 2040, the municipality would pay just over $9 million in contractors' costs using that rental approach. Moving towards an ownership model would mean that the municipality wouldn't have to pay a contractor to provide the buses because we would own them, or the storage because we would have it, and we could reduce our contracted costs accordingly. In discussion with our current contractor, we've identified an approximate annual savings of just over $200,000 a year. And if we extrapolate that again using the same inflationary factors, administration estimates that moving to the ownership model would, and the resulting reduction in contractor costs would save the municipality about $3.8 million over that same period. So taking that 9.1 and reducing it by $3.8 million. There are, of course, costs associated with being an owner. as anybody who is in a fortunate position to own a house knows, we would have essentially the mortgage payments, as reported to council previously. Administration has planned the financial structure of 5 years of loan repayments towards the fleet construction facility. We estimate, and again, this is an estimate because our interest rates are set at the time we take the borrowing. But as I think council knows, interest rates have gone down since we've made these estimates. But in any case, we estimated 5 years of loan repayments of just over $166,000 towards the fleet facility. After that 5 years, we would have no mortgage payments on that building. There would be annual operational costs of approximately $35,000 for the facility. It's, as we'll discuss in the next report, a fairly bare bones facility and not particularly expensive to operate. We would also, as an owner, want to be putting money away for future replacement of our fleet. And that is incorporated in the numbers that I'm sharing today. We estimate starting at about $57,000 a year for a contribution to a fleet replacement reserve, which is standard practice for the municipality. Over that same 2026 to 2040 time period, we estimate that we'd have about just over $900,000 in the fleet reserve from this annual contribution. So taken all together, from that same time period, 2026 to 2040, taking those added costs of being an owner against the expected savings result in an overall savings of just over $2.5 million. And so this is just that savings associated with transitioning from being a renter and paying those full rental costs to being an owner. And obviously, that would also provide the municipality with a fleet facility that would have a greater than 30-year lifespan. I think the next question is obviously around the electric transition. There's been some suggestion that the municipality should wait until a later date to consider this technology. And the fact is, when we do a survey, not just across Canada, but what the Canadian government is expected to do, although that matters obviously the most to us since we're located in Canada, but globally, governments everywhere are regulating and requiring a transition to zero emissions vehicles. And it's actually going to happen, I think, a lot more quickly than people expect. In Canada, our regulations are intended to see 100% of new light duty vehicle sales be zero emissions vehicles by 2035. So that's just 11 years from now. And they expect to see heavy duty vehicle sales, zero emission being 100% in just 5 years after that. So by 2040. There was a question about what we're expecting as a lifespan for our vehicles. And when I speak about the analysis that's been done by a third party, we use a 12-year lifespan for our buses. So our buses, by the time our buses hit their expected lifespan of 12 years, at that time, we will already have been, if everything goes according to the government's regulations, 1 year into all light duty vehicle sales being zero emissions vehicles. So at that time, it won't be so uncommon. The government of Canada has stated goals, of course, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And the federal government's Treasury Board, which sets how the government will operate as a corporation, if you want to, for their internal practices. The Treasury Board has directed that starting in 2025, 100% of all new federal government light duty vehicle purchases will be zero emissions vehicles. So certainly in a federal jurisdiction, we can expect to see more and more light duty vehicles popping up for federal use. Their objective is to see that 100% of the government's internal light duty vehicle fleet will be zero emission vehicles by 2030. So the government, for their own corporate operations, is seeing a faster transition than they're sort of guiding all of Canada to do. In support of transit, the government of Canada has also announced a plan to launch the Permanent Transit Fund. This fund is expected to be at $3 billion per year in ongoing funding to support public transit across the country. It's expected to start in 2026, 27. And the intent is to provide base predictable funding for smaller and routine needs to ensure that transit systems stay in a good state of good repair, to provide for rehabilitation and minor expansions. And so there will be ongoing support for public transit from the government of Canada to the tune of $3 billion per year. Additionally, and separately, the government of Canada has committed $2.75 billion to help public transit agencies like Jasper and others purchase transition towards electrification. They have an internal target of seeing 5,000 zero emission vehicles and supporting infrastructure over the next number of years. So as we can see, the transition towards zero emission vehicles is well underway, not just in Canada. Again, I think there may be some suggestion that Canada is a current political situation and that might change. That is, of course, entirely possible. Governments can change their direction. But as you can see, globally, there is also this movement, which means that more and more production will start to shift towards zero emission vehicles. So I think there's a question about other transit operations. We heard certainly that there have been other transit operations in the news. There was the delegation certainly presented ones that are top of mind for administration and out in the community with respect to St. Albert and Edmonton. I'd point out that in both of those cases, they were specific to an operator. They were specific to a company called Proterra, which actually entered bankruptcy. They were having cash flow difficulties, which made it difficult for them to supply the parts that were needed to meet their commitments to transit agencies. So certainly those were electric buses, absolutely no question. But I think we need to make a distinction between the technology and the company selling that technology. There are other high-profile, well-known transit manufacturers that supply EV buses, and you don't see the consistent thing that you will see in many of these really terrible reports over the last little while is that the connector is not necessarily electric, the connector is Proterra. So I think it's just important to acknowledge that some of those very difficult and impactful situations that even impacted our friends down in Rome that serve in the Bow Valley, those were specific to a company and not a technology. But as we look across the country, many communities and transit agencies continue the march towards electrification. The city of Calgary has announced plans, as I mentioned, Rome, who did suffer from that challenge with Proterra, with that manufacturer. They have 10 fully electric buses. They are actually bringing in 3 new electric buses because they have not been scared off from the technology itself. They are also planning on bringing in 3 large coaches because they do a lot more long distance transportation than we would here. BC Transit is acquiring 66 new electric vehicles to serve 9 different communities across the province, including Victoria and Whistler. The city of Regina has signed a 5-year contract to obtain up to 53 battery electric buses, and other agencies have announced their intentions to transition to fully electric fleets. One of the things that I think is important to recognize, and as I think was brought up by the delegation, there are challenges to transitioning to electric, particularly for existing transit agencies. When you move to an electric system, you essentially need to have more buses to account for the fact that they don't have the same range as a diesel bus. If you're a transit facility that has 200 buses, or 50 buses, or 10 buses, and you want to transition to electric, that means you need to have double the storage space. So having a facility to store your buses in means you need to double the size. If you could store 10 buses inside before, you need to double that. So there are these high transition costs that are a particular challenge. The other challenge, I can speak to how we've accommodated this in Jasper's case, is that you need to be more thoughtful about your routes. Existing transit agencies likely have built their routes and designed their schedules and patterns based on diesel generated internal combustion engines, which do have a longer daytime range. You can be out on the road for longer. It means that they have to rethink the way that they've done their routes. And in Jasper's case, because we're what I'll call a greenfield agency, we're starting from scratch. We have the flexibility to design our system with these considerations in mind up front. So we don't have a investment in a fleet facility that we'd have to double the size. And in fact, we can build our fleet facility with future growth in mind. We also are getting grants to be able to support that transition, where for other municipalities, their ability to transition would be dependent on whether or not they get grants. We actually, in fact, have this grant in hand. And then finally, our transit routes, our existing routes that we've used through last winter and through the summer, are essentially made up in different blocks. There's a downside to that. We've heard from residents that over the winter, there was a big gap in the middle of the day and people would prefer to see that reduced. We certainly can accommodate that. We travel about 180 kilometers in the winter per day. And that gap in the middle, though, allows for a transit bus to return to the garage. In an electrification approach, that return to garage allows for the swapping of buses. Our summer schedule also has separate blocks where there's a small gap in service. Those would allow for us to return an electric bus to garage and essentially swap out for a fully charged bus. So that is a part of the Jasper plan. You can imagine a city like Edmonton or Vancouver, a larger system with many routes and timings that have been scheduled and perfected over the years. Trying to now plan in these gaps in service would be a really significant challenge. So there is absolutely a lot of discussion within the transit industry about the challenge of moving to electrification, but it is mostly coming from these existing transit systems that have already a significant investment in their current assets and that have a significantly more complicated system in terms of their route scheduling. And for Jasper, we've planned for both of these things in our approach. So one of the things that we heard, moving on to the types of buses that we might consider in an RFP, we heard from residents through the transit stakeholder feedback sessions that there was a desire for more independent analysis of the municipality's approach, particularly around a study that 9 different municipalities in the province are doing with the support of the federal government and Fortis. That study is being led by QTRIC, which is the Canadian Urban Transit Research and Innovation Consortium. It's a really long mouthful. QTRIC is a lot easier to say. So QTRIC is running that study on behalf of those municipalities so that those existing agencies can identify the challenges that would be related to electrification for them. All those challenges that I spoke about, QTRIC is doing the study to give them advice on how they can transition. It doesn't appear that the study that they're doing for them is about whether or not they should move towards electrification. It's about how. But in any case, administration heard the concerns of residents and engaged QTRIC directly to look at our system and identify whether our route layouts would make sense for electric buses that we've been considering, and to identify what the outcomes would be. And so we actually undertook that work with them over the last little while, and the information that's contained in the report in terms of the bus configurations conform to the analysis and recommendations that QTRIC provided us. So for Jasper, QTRIC identified that 2 30-foot battery electric buses with 250 to 300 kilowatt capacity batteries and electric heaters, and I'll speak about why I'm highlighting electric heaters, that configuration of bus would have sufficient range to serve our current routes and schedules under both medium and heavy load scenarios. Now, QTRIC took 3 different scenarios. A light load would essentially be never stopping and having nobody on the bus and not particularly extreme climate situations. And then they took it all the way to extreme climate situations with everybody in the bus and stopping everywhere that you had to stop. That would be the heavy load scenario. And under any of the scenarios, just 2 units could fulfill that demand with the assumption that they would return to depot during the day, and you would swap out the bus that had started the day with a different bus that was fully charged that would finish the day. They also identified that the 2 same buses using Alberta's current power grid would reduce GHG emissions by 30 tons per year. They also looked at the expected transition of Alberta's power grid away from coal and natural gas and increasing renewables. And they estimated that under Alberta's future power grid supply, it would reduce GHG emissions by about 40 tons per year. The incremental cost increase of going to an electric configuration compared to staying with essentially the diesel buses that we have today is what's presented in the report. And you can see that there's a range of different cost increases. And to be clear, it will cost more. And this is after including the federal grant under any of the configurations. The lowest of those cost increases is a battery electric bus using a diesel heater. And it would cost just over $2 million more than if the municipality just continued to run the same buses that we essentially are using with the contractor today. I make the distinction between diesel heaters and electric heat. Electric heaters on battery electric buses are one concern for operators. Obviously, in our winter months in Alberta, we want to ensure that the bus is warm for passengers and for the driver. And so generating that cabin heat using the electric batteries leads to the batteries being depleted sooner. Many transit operators have identified that it's preferable to have an independent diesel heating system. And so administration has included that. So when we would go to a request for proposals, we would want to see the pricing for both just the onboard electric heat and an independent diesel heat, which would allow us to improve range. But as I said in that first bullet point, Q-Trick identified that even using electric heat, right, the one that would consume the most battery energy, the two battery electric buses with the up to 300 kilowatt capacity batteries could meet Jasper's route design. So in order to ensure a fair and competitive procurement process, administration can't identify a specific type of bus or manufacturer. We need to really work around the specifications that we would consider. And these were informed by, as I said, that Q-Trick study around the battery capacity. So you'll see in the report a table which identifies the broad outlines of what administration would intend to include in the request for proposals. We would expect to see a minimum seated passenger capacity of 22. The types of buses that we would likely see would be a maximum of 35, length between 28 feet and a maximum of 35 foot. Battery capacity, again, a minimum of 250 kilowatts, again, in line with the Q-Trick analysis, and up to 450 watts. Larger battery capacities are more expensive, and they are also actually heavier. Larger batteries are heavier, and they don't have quite the same return on range that you might expect. And so that's why throughout this, administration is interested in seeing what that would look like. But the added weight isn't necessary in our route design. So that's the outlines of the expected configurations that we would like to go to market and get market pricing for. We've also included a couple of things that would be specific to a public transit agency. We would want to ensure that there are wheelchair positions available within the bus. Most major manufacturers, all major manufacturers allow for a number of wheelchair configurations. Our minimum would be one. Likely, we would see our maximum is two. That would allow for more fixed, regular passenger seating. It's also important to note that transit buses, as many of you may have experienced, either in Canada or somewhere around the world, standing is something that transit buses are configured for. And so when we talk about passenger capacity, we're talking about seated passenger capacity. They obviously can operate with standing passengers as well. It's important to note that while this grant does commit Jasper to buying battery electric buses at this time, it does not commit the municipality to exclusively using battery electric buses forever, or even exclusively using battery electric buses in the near term. The municipality does have the option in the future to choose other fuels. They could be hybrid, internal combustion, hydrogen fuel cell, or CNG for different use cases. If we're going to longer distances with larger grades in cold weather, that might be a different use case where you might want to have a different type of bus or a different power system. The municipalities are prevented from doing that by making this purchase now. Additionally, in terms of backup, we expect that the municipality will continue to have some complement of traditional engine buses for the foreseeable future. particularly our school bus. We brought that in. We would expect to continue to have a school bus in our fleet for service. And that does give us, although it might not be our preference, it does give us a backup option. In case there were other extreme conditions. The other backup the municipality has built into our plan is to incorporate 3 buses rather than 2. As council and the community likely know, there's actually only ever 1 transit bus on the road at any one time in Jasper. We do have our school service, and over the winter we would have another bus come along behind, but that was a capacity issue, and our yellow school buses really solved that. But our system is designed that there's only 1 bus making all of our runs at any one time. As the Q-Trick study identified, 2 buses would ensure that the municipality would have enough charge, using that route blocking and those breaks in the day to swap out the buses. And we're actually planning on buying 3 buses so that we have further redundancy built in the system. So I just wanted to ensure that we highlighted that this choice today doesn't mean that the municipality is prevented from using any other kind of bus. It means that we're getting significant support to build out our core system using this technology, and we can incorporate other technologies if we wish at some other point in the future. So I did discuss the savings from transitioning from renting to owning, and I did discuss the incremental costs that are associated with going to electric over gas. Taking those 2 together really gets us a view of what the total cost of ownership is. And we had heard from community stakeholders that there was a desire for a longer term look. The administration does have a multi-year operational budget. But as I said in this report, we're really looking at that 2026 to 2040 timeframe. And so all these numbers are based on that I think quite long look into the future, and all based around a 12-year lifespan for the buses. So if we take the savings from transitioning from renting to owning against the costs of electric compared to gas, we see that over that time frame, there's actually a just under $500,000 savings to the taxpayer by making that transition and utilizing the federal grant. Additionally, there are future opportunities to further enhance our environmental performance if we wished. When we're using electric buses, obviously that includes leveraging solar power and potentially on-site battery backup. As you will have seen in the report, these 2 reports are so closely tied together. As you'll have seen in the report on the transit facility, we have the opportunity to include solar and come in under budget in the proposal. But that type of solar addition offers an opportunity for us to generate additional electricity. Separately, the municipality has done some conceptual analysis of other solar generating opportunities that aren't linked to the purchase of electric buses, but mean that we do have further opportunities if we wanted to pursue them to further increase our ability to generate energy locally, which would increase the resiliency of the system and increase our environmental performance. I don't want to go too far into those because of course those are future opportunities, but I think it's fair to say that those opportunities aren't available to us if we're using internal combustion engines. So in conclusion, and Council, I'll turn it over to you very quickly here to ensure that we allow any questions. Administration found, and again, using independent analysis by the same not-for-profit agency that is doing analysis for those 9 other municipalities. We found that a transition to the ownership model was result in savings of $2.5 million for the municipality. You can see that government regulations globally are really quickly transitioning transportation to zero emissions vehicles. And in fact, in Canada, the government sees the light duty vehicle transition taking 11 years when we are planning on our transit buses having a lifespan of 12 years. That independent third-party analysis confirms that there are battery electric bus configurations that can serve Jasper's needs based on our current route design and schedule timings. They also independently confirmed that the transition to battery electric buses will result in a minimum of 450 tons of greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And ultimately, the savings from ownership, transitioning to ownership of our assets with the support of the grant, are greater than the costs of adding electric buses to our fleet. So we saved $475,000 over the course of the analysis. As was said, appreciated that the delegate the presenter has taken the time to read all the information. Certainly appreciate that. Administration believes that the proposed switch to an ownership model in combination with the battery electric buses is the most sound financial decision for taxpayers, and also demonstrates that Jasper is a forward-thinking community that cares about our environment, which is obviously in alignment with council's priority of valuing the unique opportunities and responsibilities arising from being a community within a national park and a World Heritage Site. There is one other item that I would suspect was on the public's mind around the specialized nature of battery electric buses. And as I mentioned before, the municipality has a significant amount of specialized equipment. The best example is probably in Director Nadon's area with our fire trucks. They have specialized equipment that requires specialized servicing, and we don't do all of that in-house. So this is not an unknown approach to the municipality. It's something that we regularly deal with on all types of different equipment. And I guess while I'm putting the protective legislative services area on the hot seat, their one new fire truck will cost more than our 3 electric buses. And no, by the way, there is no consideration of the municipality going to electric fire trucks. The $2 million truck that we have on order is an internal combustion engine. But it does have a lot of specialized equipment, which we need external contractor support to deal with. And that is not a hindrance to the operation of our fire department. And so we would expect to take a very similar approach. There are fewer moving parts on electric vehicles. We have already started having experience with them in our fleet department because we have 2 light duty vehicles that the council will have seen across the municipality that are operating very well. We've actually found that they were some of the best operating vehicles in the very cold weather this winter. But we are building our internal experience and capacity with electric vehicles. We will continue to build that experience by the time we would expect the electric buses to arrive in sometime in 2026. And we would also fully expect that we will continue to need specialized support and service for specialized vehicles and equipment, like we do in lots of other areas of municipal operations. So Deputy Mayor Waxer, I think I've probably covered everything that I could in the report, and then hopefully a few other things that were raised by the delegation. I'm happy to take any questions from council.
Thank you very much, CEO Given, for that really comprehensive report. I'm looking for questions from councillors and the mayor, but I'd also look to Carrie Pollard to ensure that most of her questions in this piece were answered.
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Given had referred to, oh, sorry.
Oh, okay, I apologize. I think I'm supposed to go directly only to the councillors at this point, and then, thank you. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. This is some questions just for clarity before we get into discussion. We have 2 references, BEBs and ZEBs. And are they one and the same, and what's the distinction? Because as we have this conversation, you had brought up compressed natural gas potentially as another type of vehicle, and that's not a BEB, but a ZEB. And then I just want to clarify a little bit about what we're actually talking about purchasing, because between 7.1 and 7.2, there's some discrepancy as to what we're actually doing. And I want to, one says up to 3 buses and the other one says 3 buses. So let's start with the definition of BEB and ZEB.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer, for Councillor Malik. So this is the most acronym-laden RFD that I've written, and my apologies for that. I did try to define the terms. There was a lot of them. So zero emissions vehicles is the broader of the 2 categories. There are a number of different types of zero emissions vehicles, and the government of Canada defines that as vehicles that can operate without producing tailpipe emissions, such as battery electric, plug-in hybrid electric, and hydrogen fuel cell. So you'll note in there that compressed natural gas is not included as a zero emissions vehicle. So zero emissions vehicle is the broader category. Battery electric is a subcategory within zero emissions. It's a type of zero emissions vehicle. The proposal that we provided in our grant application was for battery electric buses and for 3. And again, the 3 is a part of the redundancy factor and for a strategy for ensuring that we would have that capacity. And that was something that administration, even when we were applying for the grant, knew that we would have to do. So zero emissions vehicles is the broader category. Battery electric is the subcategory within that. And yes, our grant application was specific to battery electric buses.
Go ahead, Councillor Melnick.
Yeah, and just for clarity again, so we're looking at 3 battery electric buses. And I want to reference back to the school bus specifically. That would mean we'd have a 4th bus in addition to the 3 battery electric. The 4th bus would need to be then leased. And are those costs included in this scenario? We can get it because there'll be more questions about cost, but just to clarify that the school bus is an additional bus over the 3.
CAO given.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, that's correct. And so that's correct. As I referenced, we intend to continue to have that school bus service. The analysis that's in the report is comparing our transit approach. And so the school approach is separate from that. So certainly there would be costs associated with that that are not included in here. The municipality can choose to pursue grants if we wished to replace that bus if we wish to move to owning from renting. But the analysis that's provided here is really specific to what we propose to do in our federal grant, which is around the transit service.
Thank you.
Councillor Keller, MP.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, through you to Mr. Given, and just on the costs as well, Mr. Given. So if I understand correctly, so the maintenance of these buses would be under our regular operating budget for our mechanic shop now, like it is with the operations. And the drivers, we would contract out to another company, and that wouldn't be part of this cost. That would be extra, it's included.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, so that budget forecast out to 2040 does include regular maintenance of the vehicles. So that cost is included here. Obviously, the major maintenance was included in the Q-Trick analysis, identifying sort of lifespan and when you would have significant, I want to say turnaround on the vehicles. So that is included and included in our budget estimates. And the other portion, the drivers, yes. So administration fully intends, and again, this is subject, I want to be cautious because certainly I can't commit this council or any future council to anything. But the plan that has been costed here would be for the municipality to continue to contract the driving of the buses to a third party. Now, this is quite a common approach in a lot of municipalities with much larger transit systems, where rather than the drivers being municipal employees or employees of the transit agency, they're contracted out. And we would, this entire analysis is built on that fundamental assumption, and those costs are included in the analysis.
Councillor Keller, MP.
And so down the road, of course, you can't confirm, but if you can't get drivers from a third party, then we're basically developing a transportation department and having our own employees to drive the buses.
CAO given.
Obviously, that would be one option. There may be other options available. We went to the market and we found that there was more than one interested bidder. It would be a surprise if in the future there were no interested bidders, but that is possible, and the municipality would have to consider alternatives at that time. One alternative could be insourcing the service and bring those in as municipal employees. But that is certainly not administration's intention and is not what the analysis is built on here.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Pollard for coming and being so well informed and asking all the questions that we probably had written down to ask. And I see a few future councillor out there. Anyways, I wanted to just clarify with the QTRIC study that's happening right now in the province with the 9 communities, because I feel like this is maybe a piece that's out in public. It's not to determine whether or not electric buses will work in our cold climate, but it's to figure out how to transition these 9 communities to electrification.
CAO Gift.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, and apologies, I'm also waiting for my camera to turn on, so I'm speaking while I'm on camera. So again, it's not the municipality's study, and so I can speak to my impressions of it. The participants are the ones getting all the results, and there's some privacy there. But in the consultation that I've had with some of the other municipalities, that's how they frame it, is that they have an existing transit system. They want to understand the costs and implications of transitioning their existing system towards electric, so that they can start to make some plans of how they would do that.
Thank you for that. And I was able to have a conversation with the CAO of Rome actually this morning. I had a few questions for him. We were at a federal conference for Canadian municipalities this past week. And when the agenda came out on Friday, I was a little bit nervous because I didn't think I'd have time over the weekend to look through it. But then I realized I was in a room with 3,000 elected officials and many public transit systems, and there were many experts in the field. So I took the opportunity over the weekend to try and network and get as much information as I could. So they do use electric buses in their town site. They do have one that goes from Banff to Canmore. In the summertime, they can run them for 18 hours and still have 30% battery left. I'm not an EV expert, but and then in the winter it's 12 hours and they switch out. They do have 10 Proterra buses, and from what he told me this morning, Martin Bean, is that Proterra, it was COVID, they ended up overextending themselves and they couldn't get parts. They had to buy parts up front and they couldn't, which resulted in bankruptcy. So I think that's also a common narrative, that Proterra electric buses were bad because Proterra went bankrupt, but it was actually more around supply and demand during COVID and having to upfront the cost for parts for all the municipalities that had committed to purchasing. And so that resulted in bankruptcy of that company. With our breaks in the day and our short route, I mean, it was a quick conversation this morning, but he, according to what happens down in Banff and Rome, he thought this would be a very good option. And I think, I want to say that he was telling me one of his, I think Phil Vidal's name came up, Michaud, our in charge of our transit fleet. And I know there's some mentoring happening there, and he was quite pleased with that. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say for now, and I'm sure I'll have more questions after. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I'm an EV driver myself. I've driven one for 2.5 years, so run a construction company, and I got the pickup truck, and I've just loved it. Electric vehicles do work in cold climates. It's just the range that is affected, that in my experience. But so that's my question there. We don't see any approximate range. We do see the kilowatt capacity. And I know we're not looking at specific buses just yet, but with a kilowatt capacity of I think it was 350 to 400, ballpark figure of average conditions, what is the range of a bus?
CAO Given.
So I'm just going to see if I can call up my information from QTRIC. The way that they did the analysis, because they did on a range of battery capacities and a range of different environmental considerations and load considerations. like, the number of people, the number of butts and seats will, the amount of load that you're carrying will reduce the distance. So I believe that what they really did was look at the bus configurations. And they gave us an analysis of essentially, I think the kilowatts, the energy per kilometer traveled, and analyzed our routes. I would need to take a moment or two to call that up to see if they gave us a specific distance or range. But I think that a specific number is so subjective to all, sort of responsive to all those different factors, that a specific distance isn't the goal. It would be more around ensuring that the capacity under all of the different scenarios would be able to meet the required traveling distance sort of during a block of the day. And that was the analysis that Kutrick did. I'm sorry, so if they gave a specific range number, it would have probably made it into the report. I think that they didn't, because under all those different considerations, load, climate, sort of weather of the day, and how much you're stopping and starting, would have an impact. So I think that they actually prefer to look at, okay, a battery of this capacity, fully charged, how many kilometers should it be able to travel under these different load factors? I'll see if they came up with any particular numbers. I just would have to refer to their materials.
Yeah, I appreciate that answer, because having driven for 2.5 years, I also don't look at the range anymore, because it is subjective to how fast I am driving, or temperature, or a few different factors. Just looking at the percentage and how how quickly you're using that. So I accept that answer. That's totally fine. I would assume though that the range maybe 10% more than the 180. Well, than half of the 180 kilometers a day, but would seem quite small if it was only 150 kilometers of range. But anyway, I appreciate that answer. I think I had another question here regarding I'm comforted actually by the fact that we may not just have electric buses, and then during transition, we'll have a backup internal combustion. And as we, I'd hate for like on the first day, we're just running electric buses, because I wouldn't want, it to fail right off the bat. And I want to definitely have the contingency that we're transitioning to electric. I think that's all I got for now.
Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I wanted to begin by again thanking Ms. Pollard for attending, accepting an invitation that we put out broadly to people to come to visit with us when we're holding meetings. It is for us preferred. This is a public venue. Public gets to watch both live and later on our YouTube channel, and this is where we conduct business. So I really do appreciate you coming directly. It's not required that you get yourself on the agenda. We're happy to accommodate you. You were here on time. That's the way the system is designed to work, and we do appreciate it, as Councillor Hall said. We also appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to inform yourself and read the same agenda that we've got. I wasn't able to record every question that you asked. As Councillor Hall said, you probably asked questions that we all had in any event, but I wanted to try and confirm the answers that I heard, and then see if there's anything left over that is unanswered for you. You had asked initially, I think, whether the committee had projected a life expectancy for buses. I assure you that the committee or council sitting as committee has not done that. We are still in an information gathering mode, and as you heard from CAO Given, we have been presented with a projection of a life expectancy of 12 years. So that's just information that has come our way as it came to you. You asked about contingencies. You heard a number of responses to that, including 3 buses when there's only 1 on the road, and as Councillor Wilson just indicated, some backup capacity as well with other types of buses. So hopefully there was an answer there. You did ask specifically about whether there might be grants for, say, hybrid buses, and I did not hear a response to that. Maybe Mr. Given gave it. So I missed that, but I will, as part of my questions, ask again about that. The grant that we have is for zero emission buses. And we're looking at battery electric buses, whether there are other grants, I'm not quite sure, but I will direct that question in my questions to Mr. Given, but primarily I was impressed by your comment referencing, I think it's page 10 of our agenda, and you indicated that you are not opposed to transit generally, nor to electrification specifically, but as a taxpayer, you want to see that the most sound financial decision for taxpayers is made here. Certainly, I think we all agree with that. So for you, Mr. Given, my question is, given the what I would call modest savings over the 2026 to 2040 period, works out in my math to about $34,000 annually. So modest, all things considered. And considering risk versus reward and addressing other contingencies like the motivation of other governments. So currently, you've indicated that there's $3 billion per year in permanent, predictable federal public transit funding. For next year, to what extent do your projections rely on the continuation of federal funding, given that there will be an election probably in the fall of 2025? To what extent could this be impacted by the new provincial legislation, which I think is called the Provincial Priorities Act, coming out of Bill 18? Even though there might be federal funding available, if it doesn't match provincial priorities, will it reasonably be available to us? And does that prospect change in any way your financial projections for conversion to an electrified fleet?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, I'm happy to respond to those. I think I captured the questions, Mayor Ireland, and if there's others, please let me know. First, I'll start whether there are other grants that are available. So the municipality could have applied for another type of zero emissions vehicle. You know, as I mentioned, that's a broad category. There are, hydrogen fuel cell, for example, could have been a vehicle that we could have said we would like to apply for. We still would be able to qualify for that $5 million of money. There is no hydrogen fuel cell fueling capacity in Jasper, or in fact, I think there might be one in Strathcona County that, there's like one of those buses on the road in Alberta. So that was obviously not an option. Plug-in electric could have been an option as well, would qualify under the federal definition of zero emission vehicles. But we are at this stage, I think, constrained to battery electric because that is what we proposed in our application. So the question of could we have proposed a different technology? The answer is yes. There are some technologies that are not mature enough for us to have considered them. Fuel cell, hydrogen fuel cell. We could have considered plug-in hybrid buses, but the fact is that we applied for battery electric. We may be able to talk to the federal funder and say, could we look at equivalency here and go with that approach? That would introduce some additional complexity that I think doesn't really offer the benefits because the underlying technology really is still electric. So that was the question on grants. What did we apply for? What could we have applied for? So we did apply for battery electric buses. We could have theoretically applied for hydrogen fuel cell or plug-in hybrid. The question about relying on future federal funding, no, there is no expectation built into these calculations of ongoing federal support. There is built into our calculations an expectation of ongoing partner support, which we've been very successful in getting towards the operation of our transit system. I think we are in an enviable position, and everything indicates that our closest federal partner, Parks Canada, will continue to be interested in supporting the service. We see in Banff and in the Bow Valley, they are a significant contributor to Rome, to the tune of many millions of dollars per year in operating funding. So the administration feels that that was a reasonable assumption to assume that Parks Canada would be an ongoing partner, and that is built into our assumptions. There is, I suppose, a potential that the government of Alberta's recently announced Bill 18, which requires provincial sign-off on any municipal federal agreement, could impact that. But it is pretty difficult to assess how many situations the provincial government would want to step in to reject federal dollars coming into Alberta. I think it's more a matter of the province wanting to assert their jurisdiction and their authority rather than the province wanting to cut off money coming into Alberta. So in either case, our analysis, other than ongoing Parks Canada funding, which is really more of an operational agreement, it's not a grant agreement, it's a fee for service arrangement. Other than that money, which are federal dollars, there's no assumption of ongoing federal funding. And in fact, any predictable, sustainable, permanent transit fund funding would improve the operational outcomes and financial performance. And then finally, Marilyn, you mentioned, that taking that $475,000, dividing it across the entire term, and it being $34,000 a year. I think that is accurate. And it doesn't also consider that in the totality of the federal grant also provides us an asset of about $3.5 million, as you'll see in the next report. So we're saving the taxpayers $34,000 a year, and at the same time getting an asset of $3.5 million that will last 30 to 40 to 50 years. So when we're saying just the dollars, they might not seem that significant, although saving taxpayers any dollars, I think, is arguably good. But saving taxpayers dollars and getting an asset is even better.
Thank you for that. Mr. Given, may I ask one more question? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yesterday, Mr. Given, counsel, and I believe you received an email also from a resident containing an article that appeared, I think, in the Western Standard, authored by Dan McTeague. I'm not sure that you've read it. I read it last night. It questions the electrification of private EVs, as I read it, across the country, and the challenge that our electrical grid would have to support that. But given Jasper's own circumstances, have you identified any issues with respect to electrical capacity for a move to an electrified transit system locally?
Your worship, the short answer is no, there are no capacity limitations in the Jasper town site. The location that we worked with a third party to identify the appropriateness of the proposed location of the transit facility is served by ATCO lines that have enough support and capacity, so that's not a concern. I think in fairness and to be fulsome and transparent, that location would suffer the same risk as the entire Jasper town site with respect to the provision of electricity through the transmission lines. I would not want to be accused of ignoring that fact. I think that is a fact. And as mentioned before, that's why having a mix of vehicles would be an appropriate backup solution, and why the municipality may wish to investigate in the future opportunities to generate more electricity locally and to store it locally. I'd suggest that that might be wise in terms of a business continuity strategy for the municipality and all municipal operations. But that is no different for the electric buses than it is for the operation of a lot of other parts of our municipal services. So just to ensure that we're giving a full picture, that is a risk, like it is for the rest of all of the operations in the town site. Deputy Mayor Waxer, if I could, I just want to go back to Councillor Wilson's question. I was able to go through the information from Q-Trick. So I can maybe share, these are calculations based off their numbers. They looked at average energy consumption rates under those three different duty cycles, or those three different sort of light, medium, and heavy duty scenarios. And they did it for the 4 different types of units, 2 different types of buses, each with diesel or electric. So I'm going to take the one that we've based everything else on, the 30-foot battery electric bus with a 250 to 300 kilowatt battery, using a diesel generator, an independent diesel heating system. And in a medium duty scenario, Q-Trick identified that that unit would consume about 1.03 kilowatt hours per kilometer. And under a heavy duty scenario, they estimated it to be 1.45 kilowatt hours per kilometer. So taking the battery capacity at the low end and the battery capacity at the high end and dividing that capacity by the number of kilowatts per kilometer, you can come up with a rough approximation. And so my math, based on the Q-Trick numbers, says that at a 250 kilowatt battery capacity under a medium duty cycle, that unit would be able to get approximately 242 kilometers on a full charge, or at a 300 kilowatt capacity battery, it'd be about 291. Those are the medium duty cycle. Under the heavy duty cycle, it'd be about 172 kilometers on the low end, or 206 on the high end. In terms of scale, just to help people sort of imagine, so what does 172 kilometers or 206 look like in Jasper's actually routes? In the summer, our routes are about 300 kilometers a day. So the entire day is about 300 kilometers that our buses travel. And in the winter, our entire day is about 180. So you can see that under that heavy duty cycle, which would reflect sort of the worst climate conditions, the most use of the climate control system, the heaviest load factors and the most stopping, the smallest battery capacity could just about make it the entire day without switching. Obviously, for safety and for dependability, we would still build in that turnout. So I just wanted to come back to that because the numbers were there. We just had to sort of work it out because Q-Trick didn't present it that way.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you for that. That brings up actually another question regarding the 3 buses. And so are we committed to purchasing 3 with the grant that we have? Ideally, I'd like to see 3 because 2 seems like it just covers us. And if we are in the next agenda item, we talk about the building. If we are going to go ahead with solar, I've heard the comment that use it or lose it. So meaning use that solar energy you're generating or harvesting rather than putting it back into the grid, because it's really not financially desirable. So if we would have 2 buses almost always actively charging during the day, we could be harvesting solar and putting it directly into these vehicles, which is pretty impressive. I like that. And then not having to initially have a battery backup system to that solar. So whereas if we had both buses, or we only had 2 buses are out on the road for some reason, we're not getting any additional solar, and we don't have that battery to sink it into. So I like the idea of 3 if it's financially doable. But are we tied to 3, or could we be really reserved and committed to at this point?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, for Councillor Wilson. So first, going all the way back to the strategy recommends 3 buses. Again, for that redundancy, I think any transit system is built on the idea that you would have more buses than you need on the road in any one day, so that if you have a mechanical issue on any one bus, that you have backup to be able to come in. Under the electrification scenario, our system, although those buses have nearly enough capacity to do it all in one shot, I think as an owner, you probably recognize you don't go right down to 0 on your battery. So we will need 2 buses on the road in any one day, not at the same time, only ever 1 bus running at a time, but we will need to swap out buses. We would want to have a third in case there were mechanical issues or it's out for inspection, whatever, on any one of those buses. So in order to ensure the reliability of the system, we'll need 3 buses. The up to, I think, allows for some flexibility to say, okay, so we go to market and we find out that the buses are significantly different price. Do we have options? And I think we do. So I think that answers the questions that you raised. Oh, and in terms of the solar generating, again, it's difficult because these issues are absolutely overlapped. And to be really clear, choosing not to go forward with the electric buses really fundamentally changes whether we go forward with the transit facility. Because it was really a package that we put together with the federal government, and that's what they approved. The solar generating that's possible there, we see an opportunity to be opportunistic because the pricing on the facility came in lower. The vendor, the proponent, provided an option to say, hey, we can build this facility at this price, and if you optionally would like to include solar, here's that incremental cost. And it's still under our budget, which is great news. But I don't want to overstate how large a solar array that is. The facility itself and the buses will consume, far more energy than that solar system can provide. So I think it's fair to say that we would be using all of that energy on site. So sort of to your question, we're not going to be generating so much extra energy off that solar array that we would be selling out into the grid. Most likely would go to supply the building and again, some portion to supply buses.
Councillor Keller-Hernby.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, to you, to Mr. Given. So the 3 battery operated buses, we'd run the school bus separate as a diesel bus. And that is part of this analysis for financial over the next number of years that the school bus is built in.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, that's correct.
Then if we were to have a backup bus, should we have problems with the battery, we would have to go back to our contractor and pay extra for that. So if we run into a problem at the startup and we need a backup bus, other than the school bus, that would be a separate budget.
So I just want to, Deputy Mayor Waxer, clarify the question, Councillor Keller-Hernby. Are you saying if we needed a backup bus to the school bus?
Yeah.
So it's a second school bus. Yeah, that certainly is something that we can consider, recognizing that we have more bus capacity, more buses than we need. It would be dependent on what we're seeing in terms of passenger load in the buses, so we would have some options available to us. And one of those options could be looking to lease or contract out an additional bus if we found it to be necessary for a limited period of time. No, that's not incorporated here because I think that would be an extenuating circumstance. That would be something beyond what we would expect. Council, in the adoption of the transit service standards policy, has clarified that they have an expectation of uptime and that administration should figure it out. If I can summarize, should figure it out to make sure that the system is up and running with high availability. And now that we have that clarity, I think that would lead to us saying, okay, what other kinds of interim solutions could we identify in the case of an extraordinary scenario? The other thing that I would add is that the opportunity to store all of our fleet inside is another thing that would lead to less wear and tear on the vehicles and a higher availability and expected higher availability.
I'm just curious, Mr. Gibbon, why are we not considering the bus service with our electric buses? You know, I mean, if we're going to, like, because we have to use a school bus? Because if we have 3 buses, why would we just not use, you know, I mean, one of the buses and another bus for the other route? I'm just curious.
Deputy Mayor Waxer for Councillor Keller MP, that's something we could consider. We would want to do that in consultation with the school boards who are funding partners. They, through the provincial government, have expressed a desire ultimately, as we went through the course of the year, to move towards that traditional yellow bus service, and we're happy to work with them to accommodate that. But again, that's not fixed or you know, that's something that could be reconsidered at a future point if every, you know, all the parties decide they wanted to do that. As we said before, there are many municipalities that provide school service on traditional transit buses, including standing capacity. Here in Jasper, as a result of, you know, concerns raised by members of the community, ultimately to the ministry, and for the structure of our current funding arrangement, we decided that the best way to satisfy that was to incorporate a yellow bus. If all the parties agree that there was a better way to do that, that would still support the same contribution structure, then we could reconsider it at some point in the future. But again, we didn't incorporate that because it's assumed that we will need to continue to operate that. And I want to be clear, in our financial projections, we reduced the amount of money paid to contractors by about $3 million. We didn't eliminate money paid to contractors. This still means that over that term, we'd be paying about $6 million to contractors. And that's a reflection of the fact that we will continue to need drivers and that we will continue to have some leased vehicles.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbon.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I also wanted to, if I may, just address the letter that we got yesterday. I know it's not on the agenda, but it from Western Standard, it primarily discusses private electric vehicles and not public EV buses, which have very different usage patterns, including consistent routes and those blocks in the day for charging. So this application that might mitigate many of the issues that are being faced by private EV owners. Modern buses are designed with advanced battery. I think they're like more. There's a lot of things happening in EV, especially in public transit, that advanced battery thermal management systems that can maintain performance even in really cold climates. One thing when I spoke with the CAO of Rome this morning, talking about our particular routes, and at this point, nowhere our buses go exceed 70 kilometers per hour. Like, they're just staying in the town site, campgrounds, and hills are good for EV. You might know this. I don't know much about EV, but hills are good because you can actually charge that battery as you descend. And again, this is not Jasper, Municipality of Jasper, wanting to push electric vehicles on our residents. This is global. Like, these are moves that the world is making to reduce emissions. And I really think that $5 million grant really demonstrates government support and investing now in infrastructure. We're going to just future-proof our community. We know that the government of Alberta is set to increase tourism dollars from $10 billion right now to $25 billion by 2030. That's 2.5 times more visitors coming to our park. We're going to have to move them around. Rising fuel costs are stricter emissions regulations. Like, this is, I definitely have a few more questions, but again, this is not us. This is not Trudeau. This is not Canada pushing this agenda. This is coming from what is happening on the world stage.
Councillor Millick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, and as you might expect, I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit. So I asked earlier about the number of buses. We are not necessarily committed, but applied for 3 buses. We have a school bus, which will be a 4th bus. And then we talked about redundancy. Are we actually thinking about having access to 5 buses, a diesel bus as well? Or is that, because if we're going to contract somebody to leave a bus here, that's not in this proposal. That's, I heard about, like, talking about redundancy for for an additional diesel bus. Really what we're looking at here is a commitment to buy up to three electric buses and operate the school bus. Am I right, or am I misinterpreting things?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, for Councilor, so to be clear, as I mentioned before, administration hasn't reduced the contracted cost to zero because there are an expectation that we would continue to have drivers and we would continue to have some lease costs for the school bus. So the cost of continuing to have a traditional yellow school bus in our fleet is included in these projections. So in essence, there'd be 3 electric buses and 1 yellow school bus. So that's what the numbers here are based on.
Thank you. And so we're leasing a school bus for all the right reasons. And right now we're receiving $142,000 from the school boards to operate that service, which includes the drivers and so on. Having a 5th bus seems a little bit overboard, but because that as suggested, but I just want to make sure that I'm clear on where the funding is, that we're including the funding from the school boards and still leasing while buying 3 buses.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, that's correct.
Okay, and I just have a few more questions. On page 7, bullet point number 2 about the cost of ownership. The ongoing operational cost of approximately $35,000 per year for the facility. I'm assuming that's heat, light, power, snow removal, whatever. That has nothing to do with maintenance on the buses.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, that's correct. We would have a separate line for maintenance on the buses.
And where I'm going with this is that we've calculated a modest saving over 14 years. And I'm wanting to ensure that any operation of that facility, which would include labor for cleaning and so on, but have we incorporated the fact that there'll be additional insurance costs of owning these assets? And also, I don't know what the maintenance projections are for these 3 electric buses. The leased bus for the school doesn't commit to that, but as owners of 3 electric buses, I'd like to have a comfort level as to, did we incorporate the cost of insurance and also what is in there per year to provide maintenance? Because we have 3 buses, we're probably going to get a longer than 12-year lifespan because we're not operating them to their full capacity. You know, so when people say, is it 18 years, is it 12 years, is it 8 years? I'm actually optimistic that it'll be beyond 12 years. But I am concerned that we may not have covered all those additional costs, replacing tires, replacing brakes, ongoing maintenance that's required on an electric vehicle, which I know nothing about. And like I say, the insurance costs for those assets.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, so I can give council a sense of the, so we have contracted general services, maintenance and repair are standard, and we have factors that administration provides. A lot of our fleet costs are in our fleet department, so it'd be separate. Would have to look to see exactly how finance would want to see those reflected. I can report the total expected budget over those years. But we have absolutely included energy charging costs for each year. We continue to maintain an amount for supplies in each year. We have that transfer to the fleet reserve, and then obviously repair and maintenance. A lot of that cost is handled through the fleet line item, through the fleet department budget. So I'd have to check the relationship between those, but we make an expense in our municipal budget in an area that has a vehicle, any area that the fire department, for example, has a vehicle, and they make annual contributions to the fleet reserve and to the fleet department. The fleet department then expends those monies in any given year to do maintenance on the fire truck. And the same case would happen here. So the responsibility, the cost is in that contribution towards the fleet department.
And what would the contribution to the fleet department be based on the 3 buses?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, so I mentioned in the report, we're estimating, and again, to be cautious, we put it at 57,000 per year over the term. And I think I referenced the $900,000 total contribution to fleet reserves.
So when I read fleet replacement reserve, I didn't read ongoing maintenance into that. I read into it that this would be the cost being put aside to replace an asset. It didn't dawn on me that that would be also ongoing maintenance for 12 years on 3 buses, let alone having to replace those in 12 or 18 years. So we really may be understating this, in my opinion, the fleet replacement reserve, if we're also doing maintenance out of that. It concerns me that seemed like a low number to begin with, and we may need to take a look at that again, because that's not how I read that when I read this report. Sorry, just one other quick question. I need some clarification on page 9. We have buses being proposed, and we're talking about 2 30-foot buses, and we're talking about dollar amounts in excess of $2 million, which would put us in at about $800,000 a bus. And then we go to, so we go down to, sorry, page 11 as well. 3 battery buses at 2.4 million, or about $800,000 per bus, which seems a little light for what we might be looking for the cost of the individual buses. And I see the grant funding reduced from that. So it means that we'll be contributing towards the buses, but I'm not so sure that 2.4 million or 2.35 will actually get us 3 buses.
CAO Given.
Deputy Mayor Wax for Councillor Melnick. So again, this is a budget amount, and the reason that you do a request for proposals is to find out what the market value is. Transit buses are highly customizable, and so the options that you choose to ask for impact the cost of the bus. Administration has done some market checks recently with vendors that would supply these types of buses, and we're comfortable that these are reasonable allocations. You know, I'm being somewhat equivocal there, because until you actually get the bids in, you don't know. But we have actually, within the last week, called bus manufacturers and said, hey, what are the prices of your buses running? And their first answer is, well, it depends. What kind of features do you want? And so that's where I can't say with certainty what the cost of a bus is exactly why, because it depends on how you configure it. But we continue to be confident these are appropriate allocations.
And I'm sorry, just to end, potentially we could buy 2 different buses. We could buy 2 larger ones and 1 smaller one, if that's what may come up. But that's why I guess we're going to do the request for proposal, which then allows council to have actual costs presented to us to then be able to make a decision whether or not we go forward. But until we get to the point of a request for a proposal from the suppliers, we won't know what we're actually buying. And so this is a critical step, I think, asking these questions and make sure the operating numbers work, so that when we do go for a request for proposal, everything comes together with affordability and so on in using the grant money.
Councillor Kelleher.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wexler. I also have concerns about the $57,000. I, like Councillor Melnick, was under the impression, as we talked about this over time, that that was for the replacement of the buses, which I felt was very low. But at that time, Mr. Given had said that there may be some funding from federally, just like when we replaced the fire department equipment, and hoping that there would be separate for bus, battery operated bus, green emissions funding out there as we went forward. And at FCM this week, we did hear from Prime Minister Trudeau that they are providing more grants to us, of course, if they stay in power. And but I do have concerns that that 57,000 per year is to cover the maintenance on the bus and for replacement on a bus, because I can tell you that is way too low.
Is it a good opportunity for me now to ask my questions? First of all, I wanted to thank Councillor Hall and Mayor Ireland for helping me recover, making my mistake in addressing Mrs. Pollard. I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the effort and that was put forward by Mrs. Pollard in being so well prepared to ask really important questions. So thank you. My question is to CAO Given is, would Jasper be an outlier in Canadian municipalities by owning its own fleet and fleet accommodations?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, I would say no. I would say that's probably more the norm for municipal transit systems. Obviously, smaller systems that are doing a quick startup like us may start in a similar approach. But certainly my experience has been with any ongoing transit systems that typically they are owners. Again, reflective of the fact that they're have for many, many years been ongoing, maybe come and go, but ongoing grants for transit capital that are only available to municipalities. They're not available to the private sector. So typically the municipality will use those provincial, federal grants to buy the stuff, and then they'll hire somebody to drive the stuff.
Thank you for that. And my secondary question is, how well prepared would we be to entertain future requests from partners like for instance, the Moline Canyon request that came this year?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, so the analysis and the budget, estimates are all built on our current system. And meeting our sort of current route structure. If the council at some point chooses to expand our routes by adding new routes, then that would be an independent decision. And as the Transit Service Standards Policy identifies, council has set an expectation that an outside party needs to provide a minimum of 2 years of operational contribution and including the leasing cost for additional fleet that would be required for that new service. So the analysis here is on our core routes, our existing structure. Any new expansion beyond that obviously would be up to council, but council's already given guidance that there's an expectation that any new fleet that would be required would first be supported by the party that would be requesting that service.
Thank you for that. I'm looking around to see if there are other questions. Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I have just one, and it changes the direction a bit of the conversation. Since council looked at this question back at the end of February, so 4.5 months ago, I think we were accused of having rushed a decision. And yet here we are still in mid-route of gathering information to enable council to make an informed decision, which we all hope will be the most sound financial decision for taxpayers. And so if Mr. Given committee was to follow the recommendation to authorize administration to issue a request for proposals for the supply of 3 battery-powered or battery electric buses, and the associated charging infrastructure. When would we expect that we might see the results of that request for proposal, assuming that that will come back to council or to committee, that we will have an opportunity to, as Councillor Melnick indicated, test the theory. So you've indicated that, we might get these buses and the associated infrastructure for 2.35 million. We need to test that in the market to find out what is the expected turnaround time if council, well, the earliest council can make the direction now is next week. So using that as a starting point, when might we get the information that council will need to make this decision?
Deputy Mayor Waxer for Mayor Ireland. So a typical turnaround on a request for proposal would be 4 to 6 weeks. And for, to have it open, for submissions to come in, following that administration would evaluate and return to council. So, if we're, I would say a minimum of 2 months for turnaround time on that. I want to identify the difficult position that council is in that the report that follows has very attractive pricing on the facility, built around a construction timeline that is opportunistic and taking advantage of winter construction rather than summer construction and the resulting, increased costs of building something in Jasper in the summer. So if council sees the decision of constructing the facility as contingent on the bus pricing being at or below the budgeted amount, that does create a challenge. Like if basically it's like, well, we're going to hold off to decide whether we're going to do any of this stuff until we find out if the buses come in at exactly that price. That creates some challenges for us being able to get the pricing on the facility that was proposed. So I appreciate that this is challenging for council, absolutely. And as council knows, the other layer on all that, but well, why would there be any quote unquote rush on this? We do have a commitment to be using the federal grant funds. So I think the question is, what level of uncertainty is council comfortable with? I know that, the answer would typically be, well, 0 would be preferable. And that's not unreasonable. I think what is the exposure to risk? I think we're talking in the overall context of the proposed project. We're talking in the 50 to hundreds of thousands of dollars. If I was to make a guess of, okay, Mr. Given, what's the risk? What do you think the buses, how much more will they come in at than was budgeted? What's the worst that we might face? I would say a contingency of maybe $100,000. I know that is not 0, but I would also point out that we expect to be saving more than $100,000 on the transit facility by those timelines. So it is a difficult position, and absolutely council's position on whether we go forward with the procurement of electric buses impacts all the other subsequent parts of that federal grant application, including the facility. The pricing of the facility is subject to the timelines of construction that the builder imposes. And we'll discuss that more on the next one. So I appreciate that there continues to be a bit of a chicken and egg discussion here that puts council in a difficult position. And if you were asking me to give my estimate of the level of exposure to risk, I think we're talking in the $100,000, not in the millions of dollars or multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of what the bus pricing may come in.
Councillor Keller Herrandy.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Like Councillor Melnick, Councillor Hall and yourself, we were all at FCM, and I think I have never discussed so much on green energy and talking to colleagues. And I also spent, Councillor Waxer was with me. We spent probably a half an hour to an hour at the FCM Green Initiatives stand. And I did discuss that we got this $5 million grant and that we had to spend it over 2 years. Everyone I talked to said, why can we not go back to our funder and say, because the procurement of these buses are so hard to get right now. And the fact that there is so many problems with other municipalities, and we're saying that, well, the feedback I got was that most funders would probably give us 3 years to spend that money. You know, they extended and, you know, talked to my fellow colleagues from across coast to coast, and that's kind of the feedback I got. I don't know which department we got the funding from, but I think we should look at seeing if we get an extension and have the proper information to make a proper informed decision, because it really does bother me that the operations budget is 57,000 for maintenance and to replace the buses.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I just, for clarification, CEO Given, right now we contract PW Transit to do it all. We will be owning our own buses and depot, and we will still contract a third party to do everything else, including maintenance, drive.
Deputy Mayor Waxer for Councillor Hall. So we would be contracting a third party to drive and do minor maintenance. And probably cleaning of the buses, sort of, you know, that's a typical arrangement. Major repair, you know, so more, that would be more like a capital item, would be the responsibility of the owner.
Okay, thank you for that. And is there a plan to bring someone on, a mechanic, and get them the proper training? I know that, again, when I spoke this morning with Martin Bean from Rome, he did say that Vidal Michaud, our his position as manager of transit, in charge of transit, isn't being mentored right now by somebody down there. And I'm just wondering what the plan for the major repairs, or if we're going to have someone in-house that will be trained.
Deputy Mayor Waxer for Councillor Hall. So we obviously have a very small fleet. If we had a fleet of, and I'll use the fire truck example because it is probably the most relevant. We have a small handful of units that require specialized servicing for certain components. That's going to be the same in the transit system. If we were going to have a fleet like Rome that had 10 electric buses, or a total complement of, I don't know, 20 or 30 buses like they have, we would probably have it would be worth our while to invest in heavy duty mechanic and like going that direction and having that specialized service in-house. With a smaller fleet, I think the most likely scenario would be that we would bring in specialized service, and we will also look to assess that in the request for proposals. You know, we will obviously have sections where we would score a vendor's proposal on availability of parts, availability of licensed service technicians, and we would also work with other transit agencies. One of the things that we'd be doing is looking out on the landscape, the transit landscape, to identify whether there were other agencies near us that have similar units, so that we could have more certainty around, okay, so is this a one-off unit that is the only one in Canada? Because that's going to make things harder. Or is this a manufacturer that there are other examples of that unit in the near vicinity, and where there are people that are knowledgeable about how to service them. And we do that same sort of analysis when we buy other specialized equipment for the municipality, whether it's a grader, or whether it's a fire truck, or whether it's an electric bus. We would have that consideration every time we go to purchase equipment.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you for that, CEO Given. I appreciate that. And I think too, with 3 buses in rotation, where a couple are always charging, there's a lot of built-in redundancy if one bus goes down. And there's a lot of talk about, you know, backup plans for this and what if this happens, but what if this is amazing? Like, honestly, this is 5 years down the road, this could be the most amazing thing we've ever done. And yes, to Councillor Keller, there was a lot of emissions talk and green energy talk at this conference, but what I got from people was congratulations and high fives, because this is cool. Like, we're going to be getting, you know, if this goes through, a fleet depot for 20 cents on the dollar. And I can't imagine that this will be cheaper in 5 years or cheaper in 2 years if we do a study or a plan. And we did engage Q-Trick, is that what it's called? To look at our system, to look at our routes. And this is the same, or the same people that are doing the study, but with the 9 municipalities that I again, like, what if this is amazing?
Councillor Kelleher.
Nobody's saying that it can't be amazing. All I'm saying is we have a lot of citizens that are very concerned in Jasper. And as a councillor, that is what I'm elected to do, is ask those questions, like, why is the grant only for 2 years? Why can't we ask it for 3 years? For me, if we go forward, I have to do my due diligence to represent all our members. And you know, I'm 11 years on council and I've never had anybody put a petition out there before with 600 signatures. Whether it's illegal signature or a legal a petition. To me, the fact that 600 people are giving us advice to say, do our due diligence, we need to work harder on this, or they don't want it. I think, you know, I'll be honest, and I know we're elected to this. I wonder if we should just have a plebiscite and let our community decide. But I know a lot of councillors may not be in favor of that. But all I'm saying is that Mayor Ireland brought up the question, you know, when can we have this other information to make an informed decision? Why rush it? You know what I mean? We have a lot of people that are upset with us. So if we're going to make a decision, as Councillor Hall said, this could be wonderful for the community, but we should know if it is going to be.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. And yeah, I agree with all those points. The 600 residents that signed the petition that was full of misinformation. I look at those 600 residents as needing information and curious and wondering what is going on, because there was a lot of misrepresented facts in that petition. And I want the information in front of me before any decision is made. And I do get from residents positive feedback on this bus and on electrification. And I had 3 messages in my inbox this morning about what we're doing.
Seeing no other questions at this point, is there a councillor willing to make a motion? Councillor Wilson.
I thought there was great information in front of us here, and I'm more and more comforted by, you know, the conversation that we're having and moving this forward. Again, this is just going to council now, so I'm comfortable making the motion that committee recommend council authorize administration to issue a request for proposals for the supply of 3 battery electric buses and associated charging infrastructure.
Any debate? Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I will support this motion. And because we are not buying buses right now, we are directing administration to bring back information. And without the information, we can't make a decision. So I do support the motion.
Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. To move this process along, I will support moving to get formal costs on busing, but I am going to caution that I'll be asking more questions about the items that we brought up regarding Councillor Kelleher and myself regarding the actual numbers going forward as it relates to maintenance costs, putting away money for repurchasing of buses, insurance and other related costs. I'm not so sure that we've actually captured all those, and we may be getting a proposal which understates the true cost of transit, not costs that are buried in other departments. And I think it's important to Councillor Keller-Empey's point that the public knows that what this moving one step to the next point will really cost the community over the next number of years.
Any other? Councillor Keller and me.
happy to support the motion moving this forward to council for next week, and I look forward for, feedback from our chamber, Tourism Jasper, and from our public. And, I'm not against stopping the process. I just want the proper information to make our community happy.
Mayor Ireland.
Thank you. I too speak in favor of the motion. It is a necessary piece of information, and without it, I don't think we can make the decision. But it's not the only information that we will ultimately need. But I don't see any need to not request actual costing for buses. That is not to exclude other pertinent questions that council may have. So I certainly support the recommendation, and it would be back at council next week in any event for further information, if any is available, and for further questions.
If there's no, oh, sorry, Councillor Wilson, would you like to? Go?
Yeah, just before you call the question, if there's further information, I think there has to be another motion, like further information requested, and that what information. So there's suggestion, there's questions asked, but I think there should probably be a following motion if you need specific information.
So perhaps we'll call this question and then leave the floor open to do a secondary motion requesting any further information. So I call the question on Councillor Wilson's motion. All those in favor? Motion is passed. Would someone like to make another motion regarding the that requesting the administration bring more information back to council next week? Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Councillor Wilson's correct, probably should be another motion. Doesn't have to occur at this meeting. I think I'd like to dwell a little bit more on some of the questions that were brought up in the discussion, maybe review the YouTube, see what was brought up, and then when there is an opportunity, perhaps next week, to make a motion for the next committee of the whole meeting, requesting additional specific information from administration. We can do it at that time. I'm not prepared to make a motion now, but I can see giving administration certainly a good heads up as to what other questions councillors might have that they'd like to see some further clarification. So before putting out a motion which could constrict the type of information we're going to receive, I'd rather dwell on it and then be able to have a good discussion at a future meeting.
Is there any other that I would suggest that we've been going for 2 hours, that it might be a good time to take a 10-minute break. So returning at 11:40. Okay, thank you. I'll call the meeting back to order. Using my mom's paper. Call the meeting back to order. We're now on item 7.2, transit fleet facility procurement, and I'll turn this item over to CAO Gibbon.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer. So continuing with the theme of the day in terms of transit, we have a recommendation from administration related to the transit fleet facility procurement. And the recommendation is that committee recommend council award Johnson Builders the contract for the construction of the facility in the amount of $3,204,123 inclusive of the optional solar array. The alternative would be that committee recommend council cancel the transit facility project and notify the federal grant funder. I won't go through all of the transit related background. Maybe I'll skip to November of 2023. where after a public procurement process, administration selected an external consultant to conduct a detailed scoping study to determine a suitable site, provide a concept design, and establish a Class D cost estimate for a transit facility. I think council is aware of that work. That detailed study and Class D cost estimate allowed administration to build a very detailed request for proposals. So we include all that information in the RFP that was posted publicly and notified locally on March 21st of this year. And that request for proposals closed on May 10th. A total of 6 submissions for the project were received and evaluated by a committee. The proposals were first reviewed to ensure that bidders met some mandatory requirements in their submission. And then they were scored across the technical categories that are shown in the text box in the RFD. 5% for the team and management structure of the organization, 5% for the development schedule, 25% for their approach to project management and their understanding of the project, 25% for project design, and 40%, the largest single category, was on project pricing. So the 4 highest scoring submissions out of the 6 are represented in the report. The highest evaluated submission with 85.8 points was Johnston Builders. All of the point totals were established by the 3 reviewers independently reviewing the submissions, providing a score, averaging the 3 reviewers' scores, and then a formula to award points on the pricing category. Johnston Builders submitted a design that meets all the technical specifications coming out of our scoping study. And they also offer, as I referenced before, a development timeline that will see the majority of construction take place through the fall and winter of this year, with completion prior to the summer season of next year. And that was, they actually specifically identified that as their key strategy to ensuring that they could come in at a competitive price. That approach allowed for savings, and in their submission, they offered a number of value-added items that were options, and specifically the solar array that I think we were referencing before. So the savings provided by their development approach allowed for those additional considerations while still remaining within the expected budget. The design for the facility, and there are some schematics attached to the report. The design for this facility is a simple and functional pre-engineered steel frame building. So this is something that essentially is designed and fabricated off-site, brought on-site and erected. It is not a fancy building. And it will be built to suit our existing operations facility. Very similar style of construction. I have often said it's more akin to a welding shop in terms of the style of construction than it is to something, what do you say, a transit fleet facility. I think conjures, very fancy ideas in your mind, but it is a simple yet functional building. The total cost for the project with Johnston Builders is, as I said, $3.2 million and change. Administration is recommending maintaining an additional $295,000 in contingency for the project. Together, those amounts would come to $3,499,373, which is lower than the expected budget of $3.6 million. So we based our grant estimates on the $3.6 million. That's what we applied for. And including contingency, we're under that amount with that additional value add of the solar installation. The proposed facility obviously presents an opportunity for the municipality to enhance our transit operations by providing for better care of the vehicles, by ensuring that they're all stored inside. And obviously that relates a bit to that own versus rent discussion that we had in the previous report. Again, that total projected cost is just under $3.5 million. The grant portion towards that amount, so the $3.5 million, the grant portion would represent approximately $2.8 million towards that total. So the total cost of the municipality is obviously the difference. As reflected before, administration expects to pay the municipality's portion through the form of borrowing. that would be paid off over the course of 5 years. That borrowing amount was expected to see annual payments and, principal and interest payments in the amount of approximately $166,000. Again, subject to what the interest rates would be at the time that we go to borrow. But I will say that that calculation is based on higher interest rates. With the Bank of Canada recently moving downward, we could expect to see that those payments come down slightly. As I mentioned, administration went through a competitive and public process. We saw a very good level of interest in submissions. Johnson Builders are a reputable company that have done a significant amount of work in Jasper. So they obviously understand the local market, and that shone through in their submission because they were strategic about when they said they should build in Jasper. They know that the cost of having crews here is much higher over the summer. And so they intentionally said that they would prefer to get the construction done sooner. And that led to their ability to offer very, very competitive pricing. The next highest evaluated submission, just for context, was just under $1 million more. There were submissions that were not as highly evaluated. They didn't receive scores in all the other places that did have lower pricing. So to be clear, Johnson Builders is the highest evaluated proposal, is within our budget, but it wasn't the lowest price proposal. And the intention here is to ensure that the municipality gets very good value for dollar while still having competitive pricing, and the Johnson Builders submission meets that criteria. So with all those things in mind, administration is recommending, the committee recommend council award the construction project to Johnson Builders in the amount of $3,204,123, inclusive of that optional item of the solar array. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councillors, any questions? Councillor Wilson.
Kind of a specific question that may not be able to be answered yet, but it's to do with the solar array and kind of optimizing, potential there. Is this building already positioned on the lot? Could it be adjusted? Or will Johnson Builders be able to consult that energy modeler to suggest, well, this building at this angle would be better? And I don't really know the space where it's going and if there's like limitations there, but like position of the building could benefit us as well as the roof slope.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, so the facility is proposed to go essentially in the yard at the existing operations and utilities building. There are some constraints there. There's a ATCO natural gas pipeline that's close by. And then the constraints about the yard still needing to be able to operate well, to have our equipment for other uses come in and out. That said, the location and the sloped roof does face the direction that provides the maximum amount of solar exposure. So I don't think there are any tweaks to be had. And so I wouldn't suggest that there's any, we wouldn't find any really material improvements by going to that level of detail, because it so happens that the site that is the preferred site already has that angle and exposure. So that the downward facing slope of the roof actually faces to the south, which will provide the maximum solar exposure.
Councillors, other questions? Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Waxer, Mr. Given, I turn to a question from the last agenda item, which you correctly interpreted as the chicken and egg situation. So if committee was to recommend and council approve the award of the contract, and it's premised on, in part, grant funding, does that commit council to the acquisition of the electric fleets that we won't really know about for another 2 months? Like, are we doing both at one by approving the facility? Are we committing to the grant, and does that, and then in turn, commit us to a decision on the electrified fleet question?
Deputy Mayor Wax. Deputy Mayor Waxer from Mayor Ireland. I think in an ideal world, both things would be decided at the same time, again, appreciating that there's that level of uncertainty around the final pricing of the buses. Alternately, if council, so I'll work through the scenarios. I mean, we're in committee, so we can have a little bit wider, discussion. So if council, committee recommends this forward to council, council approves the award to the builder. There are a couple different scenarios that would play out. Everything goes according to the proposal and the grant, and we are able to fund it fine. So that's the sort of normative one. The alternate, a couple alternates would be A, that the municipality decides that it's in our interest to build a facility anyways at our full cost. I'm not suggesting it's a good plan, but that's possible. So once we commit to a builder, we would be committing to completing the project. We could also discuss with the builder whether there's an incremental a midway approach to saying, okay, how can we maybe advance some of the design so we keep the progress moving so we can realize the savings from the development timeline, and what would our how could we limit our exposure in that case? I think we could talk with the builder and really identify a scope around the design, so that if we decided not to go forward with the grant or with the electric buses and decided to give back the federal money, our exposure would be limited to the design of the project, which we would then own and could choose to utilize at some point in the future. So I think that would be the midway approach that would limit the risk for the municipality. If council thinks that it's probable or likely, or that we will cancel all of the things altogether. That one would allow us to continue the design progress, limit our risk in terms of financial risk, if council thinks that there's some chance that we wouldn't be going forward with the rest of the grant funded projects. Yeah, I think that's probably the three different scenarios that are possible.
Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I noted in the presentation that this is a building that would be prefabricated, exterior, elsewhere and brought in and assembled. Basically, it'd be pouring the concrete pad for the buses and so on, and the foundation of the building. It could still facilitate winter construction, I would think. So but once we get the concrete pad in, which hopefully could happen after we determine if we're going ahead or not, once we know the price of the buses. I did have a couple of questions which maybe went down to the what the various firms are asked for. Were they asked for designing in a wash bay or a mechanic shop where we could do any light mechanical work in this building, or actually watch the buses inside? I know you're dealing with electricity and the charging stations, so you have to be somewhat cautious how you do that. And was that part of the scope?
Cautious is a good way to state it, Councillor Malik. Absolutely. So administration intentionally excluded a wash bay from the design because we have a wash bay already in the operations building, and so there was no need to duplicate that service. We also do the majority of our vehicle maintenance in the existing building. And as we're going into some conversations with the builder, we're speccing out the foundations and the structure to ensure that if at some point we wanted to add mobile lifts to this facility, that the structure would be able to support that. So we intentionally scoped the entire project all the way back to the scoping study, which council, I think, received. That was basically the same design that you see here. A wash bay was excluded back then. It continues to be excluded. And the reason we excluded a wash bay or major maintenance facilities is because we already have those, and there's no need to duplicate them.
Thank you. You mentioned it would be a steel building, not very fancy, and I'm sure, working within the architectural motifs here. Again, it'd be something rated for the cold weather that we have, and we'd be able to heat the building appropriately. So just I'm assuming that's all going to be in there. The only thing I was going to ask is, Councillor Wilson had mentioned about a battery storage unit. And is there any provision in this design to add that unit if and when we go with solar? And if it would be necessary?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, so the proposal called for all submissions to propose a price that would allow for the future addition of solar and or battery backup. Is not included, but I can say, although the electricians would get mad at me for saying this, it's going to be plumbed appropriately so that it can handle it in the future. Right, it'll have all the appropriate underlying wiring and infrastructure so that in the future, those additions would be less burdensome. You wouldn't have to reconfigure the whole building. The Johnson Builders submission said, hey, in terms of mobilization and demobilization, we can provide this, since we're already going to pre-wire. I'm a plumber's kid, that's why I say plumbed. We're going to pre-wire already anyways to accommodate solar. We could just do that at the same time for this additional cost, and that's what's reflected in the report. The battery backup would be an independent decision, and as I discussed in the future opportunities part of the last report, I think that's something that the municipality would likely seek grant funding to do. So the idea would be to add the solar at this time to use that energy on site, because we're going to have demand in both the building and through potentially the buses. And if we chose to add battery backup, that would be an independent project where we would go and seek external funding to do it. But the building itself would be ready to accommodate that.
And one last question. Currently, we have 2 electric vehicles, I understand. And as we move forward in the capital and so on, our intention is to add additional electric vehicles to the fleet, which could potentially utilize this space. In the fact that we're building for 6 buses means that we have excess space that we could use for additional electric vehicles.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, or Councillor Melnick, that's exactly right. So if council, and you may need to zoom in a little bit to see the layout, but absolutely, the municipality's fleet as it's proposed today would be consuming the proposed electric buses would consume 3 of the available spaces. Fourth bay, or sorry, a 4th space and a little bit more could be used by our school bus or any other sort of units that we'd have, that 4th bus that we talked about earlier. The facility, and so we would have excess capacity that could handle other equipment or vehicles at this time. There would be chargers as a part of the building, and so it would make sense for the electric vehicles. I would note that our team identified that the electric vehicles are some of our best cold starting vehicles actually this winter. So while they would benefit from the indoor storage, it's not required, but certainly they could be accommodated in here. And the design and proposal from Johnson Builders also proposes to pour the foundation for future expansion of the facility. So if you look at the elevation drawings, either the right or left elevation drawing, and zoom in, you'll see that there's a section that says covered bay / future expansion. So Johnson in their proposal suggested that the best way to, we requested that. They said the best way to do it would be to pour the foundation all at once. And then if at some point in the future we want to add the structure to put walls and a roof over that, that could be done at a future time. So the facility is scoped to be able to handle up to 6 units today, could be expandable to handle 2 more, or to be able to handle other types of items sort of stored inside if we decided that's something we wanted to add to in the future.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I wonder if this building will at all take away any of our commercial capacity for builds in the town site?
Deputy Mayor Waxer for Councillor Hall. Well, so this is another advantage that the municipality has. This would be institutional use and not commercial use. So the commercial square footage in S Block, I think, is fully utilized. But because this is an institutional use and not a commercial use, it doesn't count against that commercial cap. So in terms of the ability to construct new indoor fleet storage space, the municipality absolutely, that's another advantage that the municipality has that the private sector wouldn't have.
Councillor Keller, ahead.
You, Deputy Mayor Waxer, to you, to Mr. Given, when we put out the proposals, Mayor Ireland and I had said kind of at that time, open it up to see if we had any private partner applications that anybody put in a proposal that they would like to do a P3 proposal.
Deputy Mayor Wax, I certainly remember the discussion. No, none of the builders partnered with anybody that seemed to want to give us money to build this. The administration did circulate the request for proposals according to the new policy. We forwarded that information to the Chamber of Commerce. I know the Chamber of Commerce shared it through their newsletters out to their mailing list and members. And out of the 6 proposals that came forward, there was nobody suggesting any P3 approach.
Thank you.
Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Out of my depth, that's questions, but you referenced earlier, Mr. Given, the covered bay for future expansion. And I know there are 4 charging stations, 2 of which are against the wall, which is the back elevation. Would those be configured to be available to that future expansion area if that becomes used?
Mayor Ireland, that's exactly correct. So they're the proposed location of the chargers, which is important at this time for where you run the wires, or conduit. There are 2 that are to the, which would actually be all things, locations in Jasper being relative. The easiest way to think about the building is that the administrative area, and there is a small office there, as well as space for drivers to come in and out, lockers. That's on the north side of the building. And the future expansion area is to the south. So I'll just talk about the north and south. You'll see that there are 2 chargers located along the midline in between the first 2 rows of buses on the north end. And as you say, there are 2 chargers or spaces for 2 chargers on the south end. The intention is that if we ever did that expansion, the wall in between would be removed, and then vehicles parking on either side in the future expansion area or the existing building would have access to those chargers.
Other councillors. Councillor Hall, I can feel you.
Sure, I'll ask, and I know Mayor Ireland already asked this earlier, but okay, so what are our options regarding moving this forward, but still protecting ourselves from risk?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, thanks, Councillor Hall. So yeah, the options that I identified there, obviously the least desirable would be that we take the risk and commit to building the project, whether we're going to have federal grants or not. I mean, if we get down the road and decide, well, we're going to not use the federal grant, but we've already committed to building this project, then we'd be on the hook for the full amount ourselves. A significantly different financial picture. The midway approach that I suggested would be essentially limiting the municipality's risk to the design phase. So that design work could continue to proceed and give the contractor the certainty, because I've come to understand, and maybe others around the table do, that when firms put in these bids, they go to subtrades and say, we're planning on doing this project on this timeline, what would you bid to do your portion of that project? And so they've already secured their subtrades and pricing around this timeline. I think that capital expense, I mean, if we don't get somebody into pour concrete, then they're kind of not out anything. But there is that design work and detailed design that needs to happen. Council could give administration direction to arrange a phased approach that limits the municipality's commitment to the design details. And that would allow it to continue to roll forward with detailed design and planning to happen while council finalizes their decision making on the buses themselves and ultimately the grant.
If I may, and so we could limit ourselves to design phase and then still move forward with this price that they've given us.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, I mean, subject to confirmation and discussion with them. But I imagine that they would be comfortable with that. They want to have some certainty that they won't be out any costs. In conversation with them, I think that they're comfortable in working with the municipality. They're eager to do the project. But they also recognize that there might be some uncertainty and they're not going to charge us for things that they didn't spend money on. But if they're spending money on the detailed design and all that work now, I'm sure that they would like to have that covered.
Okay, and if we decide not to do this and we don't get the electric buses, what would the design cost us?
I don't have a specific in hand, but I would imagine 10% of the project cost, in that sort of 300,000 might be typical. And then we would have that, and we would own that, so that if we ever wanted to go forward with building that facility again on that site, we would already have that information available to us.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you for that line of questioning, Councillor Hall. I'll put a motion forward that hopefully reflects that direction. So I would make a motion that committee recommend council award Johnson Builders the contract for the construction of the transit fleet facility in the amount of $204,123, inclusive of optional solar array. And that committee direct administration to bring to council a structure of a contract with Johnson, suggesting certain stages of completion.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, if I can assist, Councilor Wilson, maybe it is just limiting the municipality's commitment to the design phase. Or separating the design phase from the construction phase. That might be the clearer way to say it.
Sure, okay, so edit that, suggesting that we direct administration to bring to council a contract representing the division of design and construction phase.
Is that clear to everyone?
I think we have to leave the construction out of it, because if we're only committing to a design phase till we get all the other information back to make the informed decision. Like we're saying to Johnson Builder, right now we're going to just do the design phase. And if we move forward, you'll get the construction phase.
I'm not looking to give anybody the opportunity after the design phase. So I think we can commit to the fact that if we're moving forward, the construction is going to them as well. And knowing that we have the ability to just go to design and call it if we're not going ahead with the project completely. So I'm not sure we have to leave it out. Yeah, and again, this is just going to council, so we can make edits or changes.
Any other debate?
Just remind ourselves of the motion.
Well, first off, that we recommend the committee recommend council award Johnson Builders the contract for the construction of the transit fleet facility in the amount of $3,204,123. inclusive of the optional solar array, and that committee direct administration to structure the contract such as working in a division between design and construction phase.
Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson, for the motion. And just for my own clarity, we're committed to the design. In essence, what we're going to do is find out if Johnson Builders will agree to council committing to the design phase and cost, and with the option that if we go forward, then they'll receive the construction contract. That's in essence what we're saying. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Right. Closing for you. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Carried unanimously. Move on then to the traffic safety bylaw amendment. CAO given. Oh, sorry, Director Nadon.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I am here to follow up on a request that came to council from a resident, I believe, about the use of scooters downtown, and specifically e-scooters, I believe, was the request. And in a nutshell, we've reviewed the provincial legislation as well as our own traffic safety bylaw. And e-scooters are considered prohibited vehicles under the Alberta Traffic Safety Act, so they are not supposed to be on any public roadways. Private property is the only place where you're allowed to use them, according to the Provincial Traffic Safety Act. Obviously, there's lots of use of those types of devices and everywhere in Alberta, and there's some lobby from, excuse me, from large cities to get the province to update the act and allow them. The first question we get usually is, how do the rental options work in large cities? There's been an exemption put on those, and the main item there is that they are geofenced, so they can't leave a certain area, and they also have speed limits. Versus e-scooters that are available on the market typically don't have speed limits. Some of them go quite fast. And those personal or private scooters that you see residents and visitors using are not regulated and are illegal under the Traffic Safety Act. Having that said, our bylaw enforcement service currently does not do moving traffic violations. That is a file that we will return to council with in the coming weeks or months ahead of budget. So we can have a discussion about that, but currently we're not in a position to enforce that. So the RCMP is the only body in town who could take enforcement actions. However, it doesn't appear that is a priority or important in the grand scheme of things. So we're not seeing a whole lot of enforcement there. What we could do, and what the recommendation is in the report, is that we could remove section 16.16 from our own bylaw, which is cited at some point in my report, which says no person shall skateboard or rollerblade or operate a scooter on any roadway in the central business district. So skateboards, rollerblades, scooters, e-scooters or regular scooters, we don't discriminate, they're all the same in our view. You're not allowed to be on those on the street downtown. We did a bit of a review of other communities and see what they do. Those devices are not allowed on sidewalks is pretty common, pretty typical, but to prohibit them on roadways, we could say that the town of Canmore, the town of Banff, and the city of Edmonton all allow those modes of transportations to be used on roadways. I consulted with Mayor Ireland trying to find how did that clause come about. It's probably from the initial traffic safety bylaw, so I assume there was some history there. And there's a sense that back in the early 2000s, people who were on skateboards, rollerblades, or scooters were mostly children, and that having children on roadways downtown where things get quite busy in the summer was perceived as a public safety risk that we didn't want to be exposed to. So that's where it came from. So from an enforcement perspective, we can see that downtown's quite busy. Additional devices on the roads could cause some challenges. Having that said, our administrative perspective is we don't care what you're on, as long as you're following the rules of the road, you should be able to do so. So that's how we came up with our recommendation to simply remove that section from the bylaw, which then means that someone riding an e-scooter downtown would still be breaching the Provincial Traffic Safety Act, but would no longer be committing an offense in relation to our own traffic safety bylaw, and our bylaw enforcement service would have no compliance or enforcement action to take because it's outside of our jurisdiction currently. The moment we go to moving traffic violations, that'll be a different conversation to have. How much focus or not do we want to have on enforcing e-scooters is a different story. But from an inclusion perspective and recognizing that there are more and more types of devices out there, so skateboards, rollerblades, scooters doesn't cover everything. People are on wheels in all kinds of different ways. As long as they follow the rules of the road, we think we should allow them to do so downtown, is the essence of our recommendation here. So doesn't resolve the e-scooter issue, but would bring our bylaw aligned with what our similar communities around us are doing. And generally speaking, I think it's a bit of a stretch to call it equity and diversity, but however people get around, it doesn't matter as long as they follow the rules of the road. So if council was supportive of this initiative, you could pass the motion or the recommendation as we have it to direct us to bring back the traffic safety bylaw to a regular meeting to remove section 16.16. So this would show up at probably the next regular council meeting for first and second reading. It's a bit of a one-off item, like to update a bylaw just to change the one section is not something we usually do. But if council wishes to move in that direction, it's a relatively straightforward process. Thank you.
Councillors, any questions, thoughts? Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I appreciate the report and the work that administration has put into this. It remains to me a challenging issue. So you're saying that about the final paragraph that administration doesn't see some modes of transportation as inherently more dangerous than others, so long as operators follow the rules of the road, except that we apparently have no ability to enforce the rules of the road. And so we could have, well, if they're moving, you've indicated, so I'm thinking of a skateboarder going against traffic on Patricia. We would expect that not to happen because the rule is that you can't do that, but it's a moving violation. How do we enforce any of it?
Director Needham.
Deputy Mayor Waxer to Mayor Island, motorized is the difference. So we can't, moving traffic violations implies that there's a motorized vehicle, which is what e-scooters fall under. That is how e-scooters are prohibited vehicles. And I believe the nuance between pedal assist e-bikes versus full e-bikes would also be the difference there, which would be nearly impossible to spot on the road. Like, is this a pedal assist or is this a full e-bike? But so we can enforce rollerblades, scooters, bikes, as long as they're not motorized. So that's the distinction there for e-scooters. So yes, we could enforce a skateboard going the wrong way down Patricia.
Thank you. The other oddity then that occurs to me is that for children under 10, they could be on the roadway unaccompanied by parents, whereas on the sidewalk, they have to be accompanied by parents. Seems a little odd, but.
Director Needham.
Yes, thank you for that observation. So The other section in the bylaw is around sidewalks. So like I said, in other communities, it's largely prohibited to ride a skateboard, rollerblades, or scooters on the sidewalk. And in our bylaw, it's except if you're 10 years old or under and accompanied by an adult. So that means they'd be allowed on the sidewalk, but I guess the point Mayor Ireland is trying to make is that an 8-year-old could go down the road unaccompanied. And I mean, if the parents are okay with that, then it's not illegal by any means. They'd have to wear a helmet, however. But yeah, so we're not proposing to change the sidewalks clause at this stage.
CAO Given.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, just for fun and because I feel like Mayor Ireland appreciates these sort of points of interpretation. I think that provision is actually not so much about allowing people under that age to do it. It's about prohibiting old people older than that age to do it. Like any of the people in this room can't ride their bike on the sidewalk, but right? So it's actually it's the limitation there is to prohibit. So kids can essentially ride their bikes anywhere they want. Kids under 10 can ride their bikes anywhere they want. On the sidewalks, they need to be supervised by a parent. You know, anywhere else, supposedly they can go, I guess, without a parent if the parent's okay with it. But older people can't ride their bikes on the sidewalk. It's a limiting factor.
Right, Councillor Melnick, then Councillor Hall. Oh, Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I support the idea of this. I'm with Mayor Ireland where it just feels like it's a bit of a can of worms. When we do our transportation master plan, I think that's what it's called, will the traffic safety bylaw be looked at during that process?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, yeah, I think that's something that can certainly be within the scope, but you know, because there would be implications for the traffic safety bylaw, right? If we're deciding that one street should be a one-way street, you'd have to change your traffic safety bylaw to match and your regulations to match. So yes, but I think we've done a fair bit of work around active transportation. There's all these other things about sort of pedestrianization, accessibility. We'd be looking to bring them all together. So the regulation of how we use our roads and streets and sidewalks is obviously impacted by the physical design of our roads and streets and sidewalks. So there's a relationship. The transportation master plan would start on the physical, but it would obviously have implications for the regulation side.
Other questions or comments? If not, is someone willing to make a motion? A motion. Councillor Wilson.
I would make this motion. I think it's pretty straightforward. That committee direct administration to bring the traffic safety bylaw back to a regular, back to a regular meeting, remove section 16.16 regarding skateboards, rollerblades, scooters in the central business district.
Any debate? Mayor Ireland.
I'm just worried about the perception of risk, particularly to young people who might then be encouraged to rollerblade or skateboard in the downtown core. It just seems sort of inherently like an unsafe practice. I do understand the desire, particularly of adults, where a scooter or a longboard might be their chosen mode of transportation, to free things up to allow them to use that, whether it's going to the grocery store or elsewhere. So I wonder whether we might consider amending 16.16 to say no person under some specified age can skateboard or rollerblade or operate a scooter on a road. That would free it up for adults, but we would still signify concern for our younger residents and not encourage an activity which to me seems inherently unsafe. 10-year-olds skateboarding on a busy summer day downtown doesn't seem like a really safe activity, and I appreciate the parents might have something to say about it, but kids do all sorts of things without parents necessarily knowing. So I wonder whether we could combine a desire to free up opportunities for adults or older kids and still protect the younger folks in our community.
Councillor Wilson.
The mayor had the ability to make a motion and he sat on his hands, so that's the motion in front and, yeah, it's.
And I was speaking to the motion. I understand the motion.
Councillor Keller-Herenthy.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Mayor Ireland has brought up some good points, like what's the age children get their license at 16? At 15, 16 to get their learners, they learn the rules of the road. So should we make it, you know what I mean, children under, when they get their learners, they have to pass a test. If I'm correct, they drive for 2 years, is that 14? I don't think it's, is it 14? Yeah, so, you know what I mean, so anybody under 14? Does, you know, kids can go, maybe it's, you know what I mean, learn the rules of the road, or, you know what I mean, if something happened to a 10-year-old downtown, that we change this, you know, that's quite a bit of risk. And I would hate for a 10-year-old downtown. Councillor Melnick and I were walking down Stevens Avenue at FCM this weekend, and he had to keep saying, Alan, watch out, because the skateboards just flying in and out, and you don't hear them coming, right? So it does worry me, you know, adults knows the rules of the road, slow down the pedestrian crossing, as a 10-year-old is taught in school. So, you know, I mean, I do see where our Ireland is coming from.
Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, and having that lived experience on Stevens Avenue, where actually we heard it before we saw it. It was coming from behind, and I did announce incoming because we had no idea where it was going to be, and if we moved to either side, we would have been smoked. So I would suggest a friendly amendment that no person under 14 shall skateboard or rollerblade or operate a scooter on any roadway in the central business district. Might be a good alternative to still have some regulation for younger kids not to be in that area, and hopefully rely on older individuals to use their good sense on the roadways.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I'm trying to wrap my head around this. So if we limit it to 14, I know some pretty confident 14-year-old skateboarders and some pretty incompetent 30-year-old skateboarders. If we limit it to 14, then a child can be downtown with their parents on a sidewalk till they're 10, and they have 4 years off, and they can't be downtown on anything until they're 14. I think that this should be a parent's discretion. I know years ago, and it was in, I think, partnership with the Alberta Safety Board or whatever it's called, we would run Pedal Pushers program, which teaches kids the rules of the road. And that was some conversation I had with Sergeant Daisy over the last couple of summers. It just hasn't come to fruition, and I think it should. It just costs money to bring to town. I'm not sure if I agree with 14. I don't actually know if I agree with any age. I think this is entirely up to the parents, because again, I think of even an 8-year-old being downtown on their bike by themselves is, to me, if they're wearing a helmet and following the rules and the parents have given them instruction, I'm okay with that. I just think that 14 might be, because then there's a 3-year gap or 4-year gap where they're not allowed to be downtown on those things, and they were up until they were 10, they wouldn't after 14. I'm just a bit cautious of adding any age to this, because again, I think this is completely up to the parents of those minors. So I guess what I'm saying is I support the original motion.
Any other comments, questions, thoughts? I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Motion carries. We move on then to the motion action list, and CAO Given can walk us through that.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer. So just a few updates to recommend to committee today. I'll note that Transit Capital Project is not recommending to remove it. That one's going to be on there because we have ongoing items related to that. We have a new item obviously related to the design versus construction that we caught, but we'll keep the Transit Capital Projects. Just want to note that council asked to have these items come to council before moving forward, and we certainly are following up on that. Federal housing advocacy, my suggestion would be that that could be removed. When we started discussion on this item, top of mind was the Housing Accelerator Fund from the federal government and some of the CMHC regulations that apply to the potential build on Connaught through the Jasper Municipal Housing Corporation. CMHC has been very supportive in identifying alternate approaches that work within their rules, and administration believes that we've found an approach that will not require going outside the CMHC rules in order to qualify that program, that project for lending. And that's probably the, while there continue to be other impacts from the Housing Accelerator Fund that would make Jasper ineligible, that project, that program isn't currently under consideration. And in fact, I think it's fully subscribed. So I don't think there's a lot of utility in pressing for a meeting with the minister because we don't need a rule changed. The CMHC folks have been supportive and helpful in identifying a way that we can advance the project within their rules. So my suggestion would be that we could remove this for now. If there are other items that council would like to advocate on or address, then certainly we can do that. We could maintain this and then council could give some thought to whether they might like to refocus those efforts. And then finally, the traffic safety bylaw that Director Nadon just delivered, I think could be struck because that item is delivered here at council today.
Councillor Wilson.
I don't believe we should remove the federal advocacy. That was one of the items, like, yeah, some assistance with funding, yet there are, substantially more. There's, the possibility of assisting in rezoning property, like putting pressure on another government agency. There's even maybe there's the ability to find new land for us. I know that's like a big stretch, but there are some other solutions and other things we can be doing to push housing in the community. There could be an assistance with infrastructure into the hard to supply infrastructure to the parcel behind Bear Hill Lodge. And there's many things that we can be getting the assistance of the minister on, and I still think we should push to have those conversations.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, that's absolutely why we keep the motion action list, to be able to have these kind of discussions. So if administration say, well, we think that's done, and council says, well, wait a minute, hold on a second, that isn't done. This is great. This is why we keep the list. I think my suggestion on that would be, we'll maybe the next step I think we would take would maybe be a letter from the mayor, just in terms of advancing that to get a little bit more formal, sort of politician to politician. So we can work with the mayor to do that really in the same spirit as this. And identifying what some of those concerns would be to see if that facilitates getting that meeting. Because on the administrative matters, those may be largely addressed. So let's maintain this if council doesn't see fit to remove it. And let's say we can work on organizing that, maybe more of the politician to politician approach.
Any other comments? Would someone then like to make a motion? We accept the motion action list that would, with the recommended deletions about maintaining the federal housing advocacy. Councillor Hall, all in favor? We move on into upcoming meetings. Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Roxer. I just will be attending the Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce Annual General Meeting tomorrow night. And I believe Mayor Ireland and Councillor Keller MP will be joining. And beyond that, I plan to attend the Filipino flag raising as well as the film event tonight.
Councillor Wilson.
On Thursday, I have Jasper Municipal Housing Corporation meeting where we'll be discussing possibility of awarding that contract for the affordable housing project, as well as yeah, that's main topic at that meeting. Oh, yeah.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Tomorrow, I have my very last session of my last course with my elected official education program certificate. That is tomorrow, and we are learning about regional partnerships and collaboration. On Monday, I will be sitting in on the YRL Board of Trustees meeting. And then Tuesday morning, I believe we will all be back here for utilities workshop.
Anyone else? In the meantime, this afternoon, I'll be attending the food advocacy group, as well as the film premiere event highlighting the newcomers to our community. And tomorrow I'll be attending the community conversation for children. If there's no further updates, then we move on then to upcoming events. Is there any additions to that? If not, I'm sorry, I missed you. Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Roxer. Here we are towards the 11th of June, only a few 20 days away from July 1st. I'm wondering if there's any plans to replicate Canada Day activities similar, or is that administration or a Canada Day committee anything that will become public very soon?
CEO Given.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Waxer. So the municipality will, as we traditionally do, be hosting our pancake breakfast. So council, get your, if you can start training your pancake flipping wrists now, or batter pouring, depending on the case, whatever your chosen feature is. So that is the sort of key contribution of the municipality in terms of cost. That's a part of our annual budget. We also support the organizers through the use of the space and some items from the activity center, really as in-kind contribution. But the organization of the rest of the day's facilities are really done by the external party, the committee, and administration acts as a resource to that. So council, you are going to be called into service to be flipping. I know that I think our communications team has been designing the posters to promote the pancake breakfast, ensure that we have good long lines for that like we do every year. The rest of the organization is handled by that external party.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, and I can speak to the second part of the day as I will be helping Jasper Culture and Events run Canada Day. So there will be a parade, there'll be flag raising in some capacity somewhere, and a shorter program in the park that might go from like 4 till 7. But yes, there will be some things happening on Canada Day after we are done flipping pancakes.
Mayor Ireland.
Just for confirmation, and Councillor Melnick referenced both of these with respect to his attendance. But just for confirmation, later today at 6:30, there is the short film premiere highlighting 6 newcomers and their experience coming to Jasper. That's at the activity center. And tomorrow, thanks to the efforts of council, the local Filipino community will be celebrating Independence Day with a flag raising at the Emergency Services Building at 11 a.m.
Okay, thank you. I think that is all. If someone would like to make a motion that we adjourn. Councillor Keller Harambe, all in favor? Meeting's adjourned.